Welcome everybody. I'm very happy to have Zach and Josh here from Lamassu. Lamassu is the first Bitcoin ATM manufacturer company, and they're in business since 2013.
Yes.
They've been in Bitcoin for much longer, I think, and they're very well known in the space, and yeah, cool guys, and they will talk a bit about their business. Yeah, thanks for coming.
Thanks. Oh, yes, thanks Lucas for inviting us and for having us, and it's great to see all you people here, and hopefully we'll get to meet you in person afterwards. I'll just start with telling a little bit of the history of Lamassu and the series of events that led us to making and creating and manufacturing a Bitcoin ATM. Talk just a little bit about the business, and then maybe you will have questions, or maybe you already have questions, and we can spend some time doing that. And then afterwards, when the public questions are over, please feel free and to come and talk to us and ask us about any other questions, or just to talk about Bitcoin in general. So to begin with Bitcoin in general, it was about in 2010 that we first, my brother and I first heard about Bitcoin. And at that point, there wasn't that much to talk about, except that there's this crazy idea out there. It will probably never be anything, but somebody's created a decentralized currency. And do you realize what this could mean for the world? And of course, as libertarians, it's pretty exciting to learn of such a technology. At the time, we had a guitar store in Tel Aviv, very, very far from any form of Bitcoin business, and we were just tracking it a bit. And then at one point, when Bitcoin was a little bit further along, and it made the great surge from about, I believe it was 50 cents or $1 to 30, when everyone was looking to empty Gox for the price. We decided, well, Bitcoin is becoming more of a thing. Look, the price got all the way up to 30, and then, of course, back down to 2, 3, 4, 5. Let's accept it in our guitar store. And so, as early as 2011, in Tel Aviv, there was a guitar store that was accepting Bitcoins for boutique guitar gear and effect pedals. Wasn't that much interest, and surprisingly enough, nobody ever bought a guitar for Bitcoin in that store. Shortly afterwards, we had enough of the Israeli bureaucracy, and we moved to New Hampshire. We joined a project called the Free State Project, which is a very cool project for libertarians moving to the most libertarian state in the United States, which is New Hampshire. And that's when Bitcoin started getting a little bit more interesting. I believe the price was about $4 at the time. And we opened up another guitar store for a short while, where we accepted Bitcoin from the start. Started working with BitPay, with one of their first customers.
I think we got an order from the Korean border, the North Korean border,
right.
Somewhere, some remote place in Russia or something.
Right, and we got a few orders for Bitcoin, not much, maybe strings here, something small there. It was exciting. Put out a few videos of how to, for BitPay, of how to buy products from our website using Bitcoin. But at one point, that wasn't exciting us as much anymore, especially when we started seeing what was bubbling in the Bitcoin industry. And I believe it was in July 2012 that Josh had the idea to start a Bitcoin meetup in New Hampshire. And I believe to this date, it's the longest lasting weekly meetup pretty much ever. Long story short, from that meeting and meeting people, we started on a project to build a Bitcoin ATM, and this was just for a conference we were going to, and we thought it would be exciting. And people were so impressed by the idea and so excited of how easy it was to finally get Bitcoin that we decided to abandon everything else we were doing and devote ourselves full time to building the first commercial Bitcoin ATM. And our big target at that point was the San Jose conference of 2013. It was in May 2013, pretty much exactly 4 years ago. And we weren't sure what we were going to do, because all we'd had was this orange box that looked like a science project, and we wanted to make this the real deal. So we looked for industrial designers all over the world, all of the websites where you can find industrial designers, and eventually we found one that we were very impressed with in Portugal. He did something miraculous, which was he was able in about 1 to 2 weeks' time create a steel prototype from scratch, send it to us where all the components fit perfectly, and got it to us about a day or two before the conference. And at that conference, we did not have one free second. People were lining up even before the doors opened for the conference, and we're just so excited about this Bitcoin ATM. And that stage is what enabled us to have the motivation and the idea
and
the pre-orders to continue and have this made on a scale that we could provide as many Bitcoin ATMs as we needed to whoever needed them. And then late 2013 is when we shipped our first Bitcoin ATMs, and we've been doing it ever since. Machines are all manufactured in a small facility in Portugal, and pretty much handmade, and we're in Portugal very often to oversee the production of it, and we've been working on new models since, but our first model that we produced and designed in 2013 is still one we're selling now, and we have about 200 or so operating live machines throughout the world at this point. That's the brief history of Lamassu and the Bitcoin ATMs, and how we got there. As you can imagine, there were some easier times, like when the first time Bitcoin hit 1,000, and people, that perhaps bought the Bitcoins when they were 50 cents or $1, and it was very easy for them to buy a Bitcoin ATM. And when we originally built these machines, we figured that perhaps it would be a cafe that would be interested in this machine. Someone who was into Bitcoin had a cafe, or a library, or a convenience store, and that everybody would buy a Bitcoin ATM for their place and run it. But as things started slowing down with Bitcoin in 2014, something interesting started happening, which was people had a lot more time to kind of stop and plan, and what are we going to do with this Bitcoin, and how are we going to plan for the long term, and how do we make businesses out of this? How do we turn it from something amateur to professional? And we started seeing was consolidation. A lot of the people that only bought one machine were selling them to operators that now had 4, 5, 10, and some even have 15 or 20 machines. And with that, different needs kind of came to life. With, for instance, one of them was regulation. Well, we want to operate in this jurisdiction, but for that, we need to know the identity of the person buying the machine. Another problem that arose was that perhaps somebody has 5 machines, and our system is designed for having a server per machine. And these are all the things that we kind of midway had to figure out and realize, how do we plan for the next level? And that's something that we are working on now and expect to have solutions for very quickly, but this has always been one of our challenges as an ATM, the Bitcoin ATM manufacturer, that we're kind of in an industry that starts from scratch, and you have to come from what you had in mind as the industry that you're creating versus what it has become. And it's both very exciting and challenging at the same point. Josh, do you have anything to add for this stage?
Well, yeah, just to point out that when we started, we had no idea what the business model for the operators would be, how they would make money, what their commissions would be, how many of these machines they would have, and we were kind of just doing it as a leap of faith. And somehow, now there actually are business models there. Some of them are quite surprising. For instance, some of our most successful operators are charging very high commissions in the range of about 15%. And they're some of the ones that are doing the most transactions. So that's obviously a viable business model for them, but it's something that we didn't really foresee at the time. So it's pretty incredible to me, at least, that there is this successful business model you can do with this Bitcoin ATM, which is a concept that didn't exist 4 years ago. Yeah, so that's kind of what's exciting to me.
Right, and just to add to that, at the earlier stages, I think this was 2014, we wanted to kind of figure out a way to, okay, right now we have a certain amount of people that want Bitcoin, but how do we get these Bitcoin ATMs to those who aren't sure what Bitcoin is, but maybe could use what Bitcoin has to offer? And the first thing that comes to mind is remittance. And what Josh mentioned about the fees is one of the reasons that at this point remittance is a very tricky issue with Bitcoin ATMs. Because while the fees for Bitcoin are fairly low, even now for remittance, if you're sending anything above $20 to $50, if you have a 15% fee on each side, it's not going to be worth it. So we spent a lot of time actually developing a system that would make remittances very, very easy on our system, and then realized several months later that this was at this point a waste of time and had to go back to the core purpose of our machines, which is making it as easy as possible for either beginners or people that choose to use cash instead of going to an online exchange, use our machines. And that was definitely one of the mistakes we made. And getting back to the core purpose of our machine was getting back on track. And for us as a company, I think one of the most important things for us is the user interface and the user experience. And for our machines, it means how do we make it easy for someone who knows very little about Bitcoin to be able to get their first Bitcoins or fractions of a Bitcoin, depending on how much money they want to put in the machine, as easily as possible. And I also think it's one of the things that's really still missing from the Bitcoin ecosystem as a whole, is making it very simple for people to deal with the complex problems of Bitcoin, whether it's things like getting your first Bitcoin, whether it's security, whether it's accessing all the technologies that people are programming now. And I think that that's going to be one of the next steps of Bitcoin in general, or cryptocurrencies in general, is how do we make these complex problems very simple to someone who doesn't want to have to understand exactly how everything works. All right, well that was the general overview of Lamassu, and we'll be open to questions now. Yes, please.
How much does one of these things cost?
Okay, so I have to repeat the questions because of the microphone. The question is, how much does one of these things cost? The answer is our base model is $6,000, and the base model is called, the model is called Doro, and it is a countertop device, and it is cash in only, meaning that's cash to Bitcoin only. We also have a two-way solution, which is our Duro model plus a floor model called the Santo Tirso, and it's basically just a floor stand with a cash dispenser in it. And they connect to each other, and together they would be 11,000.
And do you make something on each transaction, or you just sell them and that's it?
So the question is if we make anything on, on each transaction,
I'm just wondering.
and the answer is no. Some manufacturers do that. Those manufacturers usually have a centralized server, but the way we chose to have our system is to make it as decentralized as possible. So we manufacture the machines, we design the software, but we do not run any servers that are in charge of sending the money or seeing any of the user data. So we actually can't take a cut of the operator's transactions because we don't have access to that.
Yeah. How is that done? So this the ATM is a node, I guess, on network.
Yeah. So what we do is we have server software, which is open source, and each operator then boots up their own server, let's say in the cloud. They control that completely. We have no access to it, and then their machines talk to that server.
Yes.
As I understand, you first were into guitars, building guitars. So how come did you do all the software programming? Do this yourself, or how did you get into this technical stuff that's totally different from building guitars?
Okay, so the question is if we come from an industry of building guitars, which was actually selling guitars, not building them. How do we have experience with software engineering, or did we outsource it, etc.? And the answer is this guy right here is a software engineer. Josh is a software engineer. He actually built the website and back end for the guitar store as well. And to this day, Josh has done pretty much all of the software development for Lamassu. Yes,
How
in the
does
back.
it work in practicality? Do you have is there a card you have to use for the ATM machine, or can you use NFC from a mobile phone?
So the question is, how do you, what wallet do you use, for instance, with the machine? The answer is mobile wallets. So everybody that comes with the machine usually has any form of mobile wallet, and they scan the QR code into the machine. The machine is a camera that reads the QR code. Our next machine, our next model that will be coming out in several months, will actually have NFC support. But to be honest, I don't think it will necessarily be easier than scanning in a QR code, which is quite simple at this point. Another option is to bring a printed QR code with you, whether it's on a piece of paper or card or whatever it may be.
And how does the verification work?
The verification, do you mean for?
If I, for example, would take a hidden photograph of a QR code because somebody's paying in front of me, is there a password protection? Or?
Well, if you are going from cash to Bitcoin, the only thing somebody would be able to do with the QR code that you present is send you money or look at your transactions. So there is no protection for that. There are two issues. One is there are some manufacturers that actually print out a piece of paper with your public and private key. And in those situations, it's technically possible to scan the private key and then just to scoop up all the funds. Our machines don't do that at this point. We don't print out paper wallets or provide any, we don't handle private keys at all. Now in the other way, you have, if somebody wants to get cash out of the machine and wants to send Bitcoin, then we provide an address for them and they'll scan that and send it from their phones. But in any case, there isn't anything that was any private info that any user provides our machine. Yes.
Have you found a way to monetize on the 200 machines or so that you already sold through services, updates, or anything else?
So the question is, have we found a way to monetize over the machines that are live, the 200 machines, beyond selling the machines? The answer is no, we haven't. Because it was so important for us to separate ourselves from the operators, there's very little that we can get once these machines are out in the field. One thing we do is we offer them an optional ongoing support fee, which is about $100 a month per machine, though it is optional. So some operators will choose to do it and some won't. And the reason it's optional is because we wouldn't really have much of a choice anyway. Once you have one of our machines, you can operate it and there's nothing we can do to stop it. And that's one of the things we wanted with the machines. For us, it's really a feature. And we've seen over the years different manufacturers with the ability to remotely shut down machines if the fees aren't paid. And we wanted to be far away from that. And the other thing, beyond even monetization, we can't even use it for marketing. We can't go to a prospective new customer and tell them, well, look, you really want to get one of these machines because look how well they're doing. We have zero stats. We know nothing about the machines in the field. The only way we can know something about a machine is if an operator decides to tell us about his machines and what they're doing, and we usually don't encourage that.
And why have you done that? Why have you chosen to put such a large gap between yourselves and your customers?
So the question is, why did we decide to have a large gap of info between us and our customers? And one of the reasons is this is Bitcoin. And as we believe in Bitcoin and the decentralization of Bitcoin, we didn't want to have a situation where we were the centralized ones that could fail. Meaning if somebody hacked us, they'd get the funds of all of our different operators. If somebody hacked us, they'd get the info of everything. If somebody shut us down, then all of our machines would be down. We wanted to create a robust network where if one of our operators went down, that would have no effect on the rest of the network. And so that is the main reason. And the other reason is we just don't want to have any sensitive data, rather about whether it's users or operators. We just don't want to have that information.
Is there a legal motivation as well? Sorry.
Yes, there is.
Elaborate, please.
Well, there are regulatory jurisdictions around we sell all over the world. So, being able for us to know all of the laws in every single jurisdiction around the world and make sure there's compliance everywhere because we're operating with the funds would be almost impossible. Especially for a very small company starting out. So this way, the operators themselves are the ones that have to comply with their local jurisdictions, and we're just selling them the hardware.
When you export from Portugal,
Yes.
Correct, yes.
so it's from EU,
That's right.
and when you export it as an ATM, or do you export it as?
I think it's a digital.
Right, so the
vending
question
machine.
is basically what harmonized tariff we use
Exactly.
Yeah.
for these Bitcoin ATMs, what we define them as for purposes of customs.
Right.
And there's a fairly good definition of kiosk or self-service machine, including cash machines.
Yeah.
And that's the one we use.
I don't think they have a code
It's-
for Bitcoin ATM.
Right,
Right, no, no,
I
no.
think it's
No,
fairly
but they do
accurate.
have for ATMs.
Right, but it isn't technically an ATM
Right.
because usually
Right.
that's legally defined in a very
Right.
specific
Well, that's a
way.
good-
as
that's a
US
good
banks.
point.
Yeah.
The concept of Bitcoin ATM confuses a lot of people because these aren't ATMs, right? It's not an automatic teller machine, and there in no way are they connected to any banks. They're called Bitcoin ATMs because that's the form factor of this machine, and that's what it's easy for people to understand what it is when you tell them it's a Bitcoin ATM. But it's actually really a Bitcoin kiosk.
Kiosk. Okay.
And in fact, these days
Which
it's not
one-
even necessarily a Bitcoin kiosk because you have all these other coins. So I think we're starting to use the word cryptomat for these. We'll see if that catches on.
Right. Yep, in the back.
How do you deal with the gap in confirmation? So somebody sends you Bitcoin, probably you scan the QR code on some display, and then that person probably walks away after you authenticate that this person is the same one that comes back 20 minutes later. What do you do with zero confirmation, which would be a bit riskier?
Right, okay, I'll just repeat the question. The question is, in transactions that are Bitcoin to cash, when somebody has Bitcoin and he wants to sell them to machine and get cash in return, what do you do about the confirmations? Meaning they send you the Bitcoin, you know that you've received it, but you are still at a point where you're at zero confirmations. What do you do in order to make sure that the first confirmation goes through, or more? And so what our system does is it gives the operator two options. They can accept zero confirmations up to a certain amount, say 100, 200 francs, and then up to that amount it will just have zero confirmation. We use third-party services to kind of, as much as possible, figure out if that's going to be a likely double spend or not, but that's really all that's done. And then if it's over that amount, or if the operator does not want to accept zero confirmation at all, what it will do is we'll ask you to put in your phone number. And when you put in the phone number, it sends you a code. You put that code into the machine. It says, thanks, we now know that you're the owner of the machine. We will notify you when there's one confirmation. And then you have to wait for that one confirmation. And when it comes through, you go to the machine. It sends you another code. You put in that code. It knows it's you. And then it starts dispensing the cash. Yes.
As a startup, why of all places did you pick the country you now operate from?
Okay, so the question is, as a startup, why did we pick a country that we now operate from? Would that country be Portugal or where we're currently?
I thought you were Bulgaria.
Right, so we're both residing in Bulgaria at this point. The main reason we chose Bulgaria was basically we had enough of the US for a certain amount of time, and we basically took the globe and spun it around and just tried to decide where to live. And obviously one of the first things we looked at were tax rates. So we wanted to be in Europe, and we wanted to be as close as possible to Israel's where our family lives. And looking through all the tax rates of Europe was quite depressing, as you can imagine. And there are really only two countries that stick out. One of them is Switzerland, and the other one is Bulgaria.
And Bulgaria has lower cost of living.
Right. Other than that, they're polar opposites. And so we went on a visit to Sofia, the capital of Bulgaria, and it is quite the charming city, and met a lot of great both Bitcoiners and libertarians there who are very active, and it just worked. It's close to the rest of Europe. It's close to Israel, and I believe they have the lowest tax rates in Europe as well. Yes.
Can you elaborate a bit on why tax was a driver for your business?
Sure.
It's
Well,
usually the tail. I mean,
yeah. I think it's a driver for any business, but especially a startup, because it determines what you can do with the amount of revenue you have. So if there's a high tax rate, you need to have a lot more revenue before you can support whatever minimal staff you have. If you couple that with cost of living, then that's true even more. That's basically, it also depends on how much profit you're getting, how much, but if you look at the tax rates and the cost of living, I think that's a big determinant, especially when you're looking at a lot of the higher tax rates of Europe.
Yes.
Can you disclose like the geographical split of those 200 machines, like where you sold them, in which territories you sold most of them, and also to what kind of entities or your operators? Who are they, like as you mentioned before, libraries or cafes, or are there? Do you have an idea about who your operators are? Like
Yes, we do. I have a bit. So the question was, where are our machines? What geographic areas? What's the split? And whether they're cafe owners or where they're usually placed. So the first question, the answer is most of them at this point are in North America, especially Canada. That's probably our largest market. And then we have several around Europe, especially London. But we have Finland is one of our biggest operators is actually in Finland, Prasos. And we have some across Asia as well, and Australia. Australia we also have I believe about 10, 12 machines. And then we have them dispersed in Hong Kong and Singapore, and a few in Japan, a few in China, etc. So we have at least one machine probably in about 30, 40 countries, but the highest concentration is in Canada and the US at this point. And then the second part of where they're placed, many of them will be placed in cafes, convenience stores, gas stores, but they won't be owned by the store owners. They'll be owned by a network of ATMs, somebody who owns, say, 10, 12, or 20 machines, and will place them in these areas where they know that there will be the most volume and traffic based on how their other machines are doing.
Are you selling those machines as an industrial product? So you are providing a warranty period, and you provide a manual with it. And that's the first question. The second question is there a transactional limit as to the value of a transaction?
Okay, so the first question, I'll repeat, is whether we're selling this as an industrial product, if there's a warranty on the machine. And the second question was?
Is there a limit transaction?
Oh, if there's a global transactional limit for our machines. So the first question is, yes, we are selling these as commercial devices, and there is a 12-month warranty on all components. And the second question is that we have no idea what a global limit would be, so we don't set anything. The operator, when they receive the machine, has the ability to put a limit on every transaction. And so they will just go into the back end and they'll say, well, I've spoken to my lawyers and I have to put a $2,000 limit on this machine, so that's what I'm going to put into it. And then nobody will be able to put in a transaction of more than $2,000. Yes?
And what's your main marketing channel? How do you get in touch with your potential customers?
So the question is, what's our marketing channel? How do we get in with potential customers? Well, it used to be a lot of press. That's how it started off for us. So people were very excited about Bitcoin ATMs early on. And now we hardly do any marketing at all. This is all inquiries come in. People are actually looking to start up Bitcoin ATMs, and they contact us. And the other, probably about 50% of our sales are existing operators that are expanding.
Okay.
Yes?
So what would be a typical business model of one of your operators?
So
you said some charge 15% or what's the...
So the question is, what's the business model of one of our operators? Well, the business model is to make enough money off of the fees to then expand and get another machine and keep on making money off of fees. And
after paying for all the lawyers and
after paying for lawyers, but once they get those first 2, 3, 4 machines up there, it's a lot easier for them to just buy another machine, know exactly where to put it, and start making money immediately. And this is something that Josh mentioned was interesting. Whether early on, the fees were actually the commission was actually lower. So people would charge 2%, 3.5%. At one point, the average was probably about 5.5%. Now some of our most successful operators take as high or even higher than 15% on each transaction. And those are the ones that are expanding the fastest, the ones that have 10, 12, 15 machines and are always buying more.
I know you don't have any data, but talking with your customers, average number of transactions per day or something, at least the ones that have the most amount of movement.
Right. So I would say it's probably between, on average, probably between 10 and 30 transactions per day.
That's per machine, right?
Per machine.
Per machine.
Per machine. Some will have obviously as low as 2, 3 if it's not in a good location or if it's in a country where people aren't aware of Bitcoin, and it can get a lot higher. It can get up to 50 or possibly even 100 transactions a day for some of the machines in the busier areas. And the average transaction for cash in is usually around $250. Yes.
How do you get the real-time courses, and what would you do if one of the exchanges would go down? Do you have a rotating system, or does the machine display the current course when the volatility is high?
Okay, yeah. Basically, we allow the operator to choose among several different price feeds. At this point, there's no backup price feed, but that's probably a good idea. Generally, if a price feed goes down, we'll just change it to something else, but it doesn't happen all that often. Another related problem is a lot of the operators are hooked up to an exchange, so they can trade coins in real time as people put in cash or withdraw cash. So of course, if the exchange goes down, then they're in a problem. But they couldn't easily switch that to another exchange either, because then they'd have to have all the capital reserve in that exchange as well. So I think for the most part, they're relying on these exchanges, and if they go down, then their machine will have to go down for a bit.
Yes.
How many different currencies do you support on the fiat side? I assume you have to do some customizations for euros, for Swiss francs, and different areas.
So the question is, what currencies can we do on our machine side? Fiat currencies. And the answer is it really depends on the machines we use. So we work mostly with models by a company called JCM, which stands for Japan Cash Machines, and they support all of the major currencies. The problem is that they don't usually support 2 currencies at a time. They have several firmwares for several countries, maybe like Euro and the British Pound, which they would have a firmware for both currencies, but in most cases it's one or the other. So they will easily support the Swiss franc and Euro and US dollar and probably about the top 50 to 70 currencies in the world will be no problem. And then sometimes on a different model we'll support a few more. But we have gotten certain requests in the past for currencies that we couldn't support.
From the Caribbean?
Certain ones either from the Caribbean or certain countries in Africa that just weren't supported by any of these companies. So we just had really nothing to offer them, except, we can give you a machine with US dollars if people use enough of those there. Yes?
In terms of the demand, have you seen a significant pickup, or how has the curve been over the past, let's say, 24 months?
Okay, so the question is, over the past 24 months, have we seen a rise in demand? And the answer is yes. Especially since the end of 2014 was especially quiet. I think everyone was kind of shocked into submission after it got all the way up to 1,000 and then just dropped to 200. But then slowly, 2015, it started growing, and we've had very stable growth in 2016 and 2017. Yes.
Yeah. Switzerland just recently introduced a new 50 franc note.
Mm-hmm.
How did you guys manage through that, or how does that process get managed?
Okay, so the question is, how do we deal with new, for instance, there's a new 50 franc note, how do we deal with new currencies? Well, I'll start with the fact that I don't really like them because they usually cause more troubles, especially the polymer notes, for instance, with Canada. But it really is something that is not something that we do as much as the manufacturer of the bill validators releases a new firmware. And they usually get the bills several months ahead of time, so they have time to prepare for it. So we'll just get a notification if there's new firmware, and then we'll write our operators and say, hey, we have a new firmware for you. This is how you apply it to your existing machines. So for instance, the euro has had several new notes, and we've been doing that for them as well. Yes?
But hardware-wise, is this the same module as a normal ATM has? Or for me as an operator, fake money would be a big risk. This is not working.
So the question is, can these machines really handle a counterfeit money, and are they secure? Is that the question? Okay. Yes. So these are the specific machines that we use are actually used in a lot of gambling machines. So it's just as important for them to make sure that there are no counterfeit currencies that people can just gamble with. And they have probably about 7 or so different sensors for making sure that it's not a counterfeit bill. And we have had 0 cases that we're aware of any counterfeit used with our machines.
And we probably hear about that, I imagine.
Yes.
The
Operators are
lost
vocal.
money. Yeah.
Right.
Did you have a question?
No, actually, I had the same question.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
Another one.
Okay.
The computer inside the machine, what is this? Is it a Raspberry Pi, or what do you...
Do you want to answer that one?
Yeah, so we've gone through a few different computing platforms. Our very first machine used a Google Nexus tablet, which has held up surprisingly well over the years. I mean, there's some people still running that from 2013, this little Google Nexus tablet in their ATM. Then we went on to an industrial kind of tablet computing platform. And for our new model that we're working on now, we're actually working on a custom board with a built-in ARM processor.
Yeah. Knowing that you don't have specific knowledge about the customers of the 15% operators, can you guess or talk to what kind of customers those are that are willing to pay 15% above market for Bitcoin?
We really don't know anything about them. All we can assume is that there are people that prefer to use cash for a variety of different reasons. One of them could be that they're putting in very small amounts, and for that amount it's not worth worrying too much about the fee, and it's not worth the alternatives, which is either local Bitcoins or going to an exchange and hooking up their account, etc.
What is the transactional sort of divide, Bitcoin to currency or the other way around?
So the question is, what's the divide between cash in and cash out transactions? That's a very good question that we're trying to figure out, but don't have an answer yet. We've heard anything from some of our machines do 50-50 to 20-80. The larger number, if it's not equal, the larger number is almost always cash in. But I think it depends on a lot of things, and we just don't have enough information to give any conclusive answer to that. But it's something that we're definitely curious about.
I think it's pretty clear that there's more cash in, people buying Bitcoin than the other way around.
Right.
But it's hard to tell what the exact number is.
Well, it's also something that we think about all the time. For instance, we want a Bitcoin ATM to be self-sufficient, meaning that it has the same in and out. What can we do in the future to program these machines so that to motivate and incentivize users to take cash out of the machine when it needs to be taken out? Meaning, if there's 80% cash in, and you don't want to have to send somebody to take the cash out and put it into a bank, it may be worth incentivizing users with an even minus commission rate, meaning paying them to take the cash to avoid having somebody service it.
Excuse me. One more question.
Last question.
Yes.
Somebody new?
Do you know if there are any governments or institutional investors that are interested in your products, or are they only like private investors that are buying your products?
Okay, so the question is, are there any institutional investors or governments that are buying our products, or only private investors? Not that I know of. As far as I know, these are just entrepreneurs that have an idea of making a business out of operating Bitcoin ATMs. We haven't been contacted by governments yet, or institutional investors either. And this is something. I mean, if you, those of you that read all of the Bitcoin news sources, whether it's Reddit or Twitter or any of the other ones, you'll know that Bitcoin ATMs are pretty low-key. You don't hear a lot about Bitcoin ATMs, which is both good and bad. There haven't been too many horrible issues with Bitcoin ATMs, people losing money, because Bitcoin ATMs don't actually store anybody's money. So it's a very safe way to get Bitcoin, but it's also kind of more of a low-key thing. Nobody's making hundreds of millions of dollars by operating Bitcoin ATMs. So it's not something that I would expect would necessarily really interest institutional investors at this point, though hopefully in the future.
Some of the big accounting firms are kind of showing off Bitcoin ATMs in their offices. They haven't bought any of ours, but some of the competitors.
Last question. One question. What does Lamassu mean?
I'll let you answer it.
Okay. So the question is, what does Lamassu mean? And it's an Assyrian deity that was used as the protectors of households. And when we originally started Lamassu, we had an idea that was a little bit different than Bitcoin ATMs, which was more of a security consulting, etc. So it made a lot of sense. But then we liked the name so much that when we started doing Bitcoin ATMs, we just stuck to it. Thanks a lot, everyone. And again, if you have any questions beyond that, feel free to come up to us and ask and chat. Thank you.
Thanks a lot for being here. It was very interesting. Now you all know it's very easy to make money in Bitcoin just by an ATM.